I never met Alan Hall's mum, Shirley. She died in 2012. From 1986, when Alan was jailed, till her death 27 years later, Shirley fought tirelessly to free her son.
I'm the only one, the one who has to fight for him. He can't do him for himself.
In TV interviews, she appears as a small, slight woman who looks at you with a soft smile but determined eyes. A window into a spirit hardened and bruised from decades fighting for her boy.
I still feel very bitter, very angry, but I'm still very determined that we're going to get justice, no matter how long it takes us, because I know Alan's innocent.
Because the story of Alan Hall and Arthur Easton isn't just a story of their interweaving fates, but a story of the human wreckage a murder leaves in its wake. The Eastons lost a father and a husband, and Shirley was separated from her son.
A lovely woman who was very rational and could see the problems and the balancing acts that had to be done.
After Alan was convicted, Shirley knew that she needed to mount an appeal. Bruce Stainton was the lawyer she approached for help. Shirley sold the family home to pay for the legal fees.
I saw her as somebody who would spend as much time as it took sitting down with the police file, working her way through it and bringing to me anything that she found.
Shirley spent countless hours working on Alan's case. The boxes of documents the Hall family still have are full of letters Shirley wrote to experts, witnesses, and even Justice Minister Geoffrey Palmer, in which she pulled no punches.
I'm not asking for any more than the correction of injustices, which has placed a young man in prison life. I believe the only way of correcting this is to give advice to the Governor-General to require the Court of Appeal to re-examine this case for a retrial. I will not rest until justice is done.
Her son Greg saw her commitment firsthand.
She's got private detectives involved to go and get some statements clarified from witnesses. But she was limited in budget because, she wasn't rich, and anytime she got the money available, she'd put it in towards making more headway in Alan's case.
Shirley fought on and on until she lost her own fight.
She was going as long as she could do it. I mean, the dementia in the end was sort of what stopped her a bit, but she just wanted to get his name cleared.
And before she died, Greg and his brother Jeff made her a final promise.
It was one thing that I said to her in her final weeks was that we are going to fight on till Alan and the family has their name back.
From Newshub, this is Grove Road. I'm Mike Wesley Smith.
I'm 100% sure he wasn't European. 100% sure.
My name is Alan Hall, and I was wrongfully convicted of the murder of Arthur Easton.
I want to take you back to the 14th of October 1985. It's day one of the Arthur Easton homicide investigation.
I spoke to Mr on my first day at the inquiry.
It is 6:30 p.m. and a young detective constable, Bruce Hesketh, is on his way to interview Witness A at his home. To Bruce, Witness A has always been a central part of this case. You'll remember, he's the witness who saw a suspicious-looking Māori man running near the crime scene.
Why do you consider his sighting of particular relevance, given what you know of the circumstances of the offender?
Well, the timing, the fact that he left his mother's address at 8 o'clock as he went down Elmer Street. The description he gave was of a person that was anywhere between 5'7" and 6 foot, male Māori.
But here's the thing. Neither Alan's lawyers, nor the judge, nor jury ever got to hear Witness A's description of the man he saw as Māori. If that sounds unusual, well, that's because it is. And here's how it happened. On the night of the murder, Witness A called Pakeha police to say he'd seen a Māori man running near the crime scene shortly after 8 p.m. He had pulled up to the corner of Clevedon Road and Shirley Avenue. His wife was in the passenger seat. This spot is 400 metres from the Easton family home and about 170 metres from where police dog Samurai tracked the offender to. Here is what Witness A told Bruce Hesketh, read by an actor.
I would describe the guy as being male Māori, and his height would be between 5'7" and 6 foot. I'm 5'6", and he was definitely taller than me. He was of average build, by that I would say your build.
Witness A is describing Bruce's build. Bruce says back then he was of about medium build and over 6 foot, 10 centimetres taller than Alan Hall.
When he turned around, I could see that he was definitely dark-skinned. He was not white.
The next part of Witness A's statement is significant. He says,
I could not see his facial features to recognise him again. He was wearing a dark blue sweatshirt with a hood. It was dark in the right-of-way, and I couldn't see his face when he looked around.
What Bruce says is clear from Witness A was his belief that the man he'd seen was Māori. A description consistent with other information police had gathered in those first days of the inquiry.
Look, I can recall, I still have my notebooks from that period of time, right. And I've got a record of it. The first briefing we had, we were looking for a male Māori. Our focus was on male Māori for a long time.
Right.
Months passed before Witness A heard from the police again. Meanwhile, Alan Hall had twice been interviewed and his family home raided by detectives. The Easton boys had given several statements and been through a reconstruction of their father's murder. Shirley Hall made her feelings about that exercise quite clear.
The evidence changed dramatically at the time of a reconstruction at the end of January. That's a month after the police came in contact with Alan. Yes, okay. And he dropped several inches, changed colour and turned left-handed.
But Witness A's statements to police that he believed he'd seen a Māori man presented a problem for detectives zeroing in on 5'7" Pakeha man Alan. So on the 19th of February 1986, Detective Sergeant James White visited Witness A at his home in Papakura. The following is what Witness A said to Detective Sergeant James White in that meeting.
I still feel that the person I saw that night was a Māori. His features seemed Māori, his stance seemed to be Māori. When I asked my wife to look at this guy, I remember saying to my wife, look at that sneaky guy over there. My wife reckons I said, look at that Māori guy. I can't remember if I said that or not. I am 100% sure he was Māori. That was my immediate impression. I do not feel he was Pakeha, not even a dark-skinned one.
Years later, Alan Hall's defence team took an affidavit from Witness A about his meeting with the detective. Here is what he told them.
On the 19th of February 1986, I was further interviewed by Detective Sergeant J.R. White, who wanted me to make a further statement. The detective concentrated his questions on whether the man I saw was a Māori. He was questioning me as to whether I was certain the man was a Māori. The detective was going over the matter of identity of race a number of times and appeared to be trying to get me to be uncertain or change my mind as to whether I could say the man I saw was a Māori. I remained firm in my clear belief and recollection that the man I saw was a Māori.
Over the past year, I've tried numerous times to speak to Witness A. I've Facebook messaged him, I've sent him letters, but so far, I've not heard back. I've also tried to contact Detective Sergeant James White to get his response to Witness A's claims. I finally reached him by phone this August.
Yeah, hi James. My name is Mike Wesley-Smith. I'm a journalist calling from Newshub.
Yeah.
I've tried to email you a couple of times about the Alan Hall case.
Yeah, I'm interested in talking to you. If you've got something you want to discuss, and I suggest you discuss it with the police in Manukau City.
I have to get out of fairness, I have to get your response to an allegation made by a witness.
Not interested in talking to you. Don't bother me, don't ring me again.
In total, Witness A told police on 3 different occasions that the man he saw he believed was Māori. But as Alan's trial approached, in June 1986, the 2 heads of the Arthur Easton investigation, Detective Chief Inspector Brian Rowe and Detective Senior Sergeant Calvin McMinn, decided to check the reliability of Witness A's sighting.
Well, you're talking about the experiment they ran with Detective Inspector Ryan sitting there and getting a bunch of police officers to run across the road.
Bruce Hesketh is describing what police came to call their suspect sighting experiment. It involved a detective parking up where witness A had been in his car and sending cops of various ethnicities running across the road in front of the detective. As Bruce Hesketh describes it, the experiment didn't involve the very person who made the sighting, witness A.
I mean, it was 6 or 7 months later, different time of the year, probably different lighting.
Bruce Hesketh, who had originally interviewed witness A, was not involved in this experiment. He didn't even know about it at the time. But as a defence lawyer now, he is critical of the whole exercise.
At the end of the day, we don't know Detective Inspector Ryan's eyesight was like. We don't know when it is that Mr actually first got a glimpse of the person's face. There are so many variables there, and I'd be highly doubtful that a High Court judge would have allowed that evidence in.
I decided to ask one of New Zealand's top evidence experts for his thoughts on the police experiment.
Had you tried to put this experiment in court, a judge would have laughed.
This is Associate Professor Scott Optikin from Auckland University.
They would have laughed at you. Because I happen to know the New Zealand law on experiments and demonstrations and what you have to do to get one into court very well.
Scott says the law determining whether a court lets in evidence of experiments is clear.
You have to have substantial similarity between the test conditions and the conditions that you're trying to, the conditions about where the crime took place, so that the test conditions tell you something about it. And this doesn't even come close to that. Yeah. It's a joke. Okay, it's a complete joke.
Nonetheless, this sighting experiment and its finding was the reason witness A's Māori description was removed from his statement, because it was considered unreliable.
Seems to be effort to tailor the description of the offender to meet Alan Hall's description.
That's Bruce Jack, the former cop and private investigator hired by Alan's family following his conviction. It was Bruce, about 2 years after Alan's trial, who first discovered what police had done with witness A's statement. Witnesses are legally required to read and sign their statements before they can be presented in a court of law. But on the 23rd of June 1986, after the suspect sighting experiment had been conducted and 2 months before Alan's trial began, police visited witness A one last time.
The police got him to sign it, but they said that they were in a hurry, so they couldn't give him time to read it, but sign it and you won't have to go to court. So he signed it. He did not know at that time that the word Māori had been deleted from the text.
Witness A later said in his affidavit,
I still believe that the person I saw that night was a Māori person, and that would have been evidence if called to court. And the police certainly knew that I was definite in that identification.
So when you went back to him those years later, what was his initial reaction to the news that...
Complete surprise and quite annoyed, because he was quite determined that the person he saw was a Māori, and to have that taken out of his statement is wrong.
But as I said, this realisation from witness A came 2 years after Alan's trial. Back then, because Alan's lawyers were never told all of what witness A had said, they didn't ask for witness A to give evidence at Alan's trial in person. That meant his changed statement was the one read to the jury and judge. And in his summing up, trial judge Justice Pritchard told the jury, "It is an important piece of evidence. I think I should read it to you because it has quite a bearing here." I asked Scott Optikin if it's okay for witness statements to be changed by police or prosecutors if they believe their evidence is unreliable.
No, absolutely not. In essence, you're setting yourself up as either the judge or the jury, and that's something that police and prosecutors should absolutely not do.
Questions over witness A's evidence don't stop there. His court statement records him as saying the person he saw was wearing a blue jersey and then refers to Exhibit 31. Exhibit 31 was Alan's blue jersey police seized from his home in December 1985. His brother Greg still has it. Police alleged Alan may have worn the sweatshirt when he murdered Arthur Easton in October 1985. But at trial, Alan's lawyers produced evidence showing Alan actually bought the jumper 2 months after the murder. Witness A later said he was never shown Alan's jersey by police.
I note that my statement refers to Exhibit 31. I was never shown any article, and so could not identify any exhibit as being worn by the Māori I saw that night.
Here's a quick lesson on what information police and prosecutors are required to hand over to defence lawyers. It's called disclosure, and to first explain the obligations of prosecutors, Scott Optikin is going to help me.
I was briefly a prosecutor in New York City.
As I mentioned before, Scott's one of the foremost authorities on rules of evidence and is a former prosecutor himself.
And I spent a lot of time dismissing cases and negotiating cases, and I never thought that it was my obligation to try to win every case at all cost.
I asked Scott what role prosecutors are meant to fulfill in a criminal trial.
It's not about winning and losing, although prosecutors care about their win-loss record. But theoretically, the prosecution's job is to do justice and to present a case in the most fair and accurate way possible, and then let the trier of fact decide, what to do.
As for defence lawyers, Scott says they're not required to ferret out the truth. It's their job to ensure evidence presented by the prosecution and police is strong enough to sustain a conviction.
You simply have an obligation to represent that person to the best of your ability, put the crown to their proof, as long as you're not doing anything fraudulent or unethical.
Prosecutors have a powerful role in the justice system. They decide what charges to file and what information will be provided to the defence. This includes statements made by the accused, statements made by witnesses, crime scene photographs, and forensic evidence. The material is collected by investigating officers, like Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Pizzini. We heard from Dave in episode 2, when he explained how police work to freeze and preserve murder scenes in order to limit forensic contamination.
Well, I started working on homicides as a young detective in the mid-1980s, 1985. I ran 14 homicide investigations, all of which were in South Auckland.
Dave says the job of preparing statements and evidence for the prosecutor falls to the officer in charge of the inquiry. In a murder case, that's usually a senior detective. And overwhelmingly, he says he and other detectives he worked with always handed over all relevant information to the defence. The reason for that is simple.
Well, speaking from my own experience, most certainly, and that is because if you don't provide material that is of value to the defence, then that could be a ground for appeal. So if you have a successful outcome at your trial, you don't want the conviction overturned in the Court of Appeal for a technicality like that.
So it's self-defeating if you...
Yeah, exactly.
Now, like anything, the rules of disclosure have evolved over the years. Take, for example, retired police officer Bruce Jack, who we've heard from before.
Well, disclosure wasn't in my day, so basically what the defence didn't know, we didn't want to tell them.
And it was while Bruce was in the police that a double murder occurred that would forever change the public image of the New Zealand police and draw into question the institution's
Arthur
integrity.
Thomas arrested and convicted after 2 trials.
You don't give up when you know the man is innocent.
That case was the killing of Harvey and Jeanette Crew in 1970. Arthur Allen Thomas, a farmer from Pakeha, south of Auckland, was twice wrongfully convicted of their murders. He served 9 years in prison before being pardoned and compensated by the government in 1979.
We have endorsed a recommendation from the Minister of Justice that we should recommend to the Governor-General that he exercise the prerogative of mercy and pardon Arthur Allen Thomas of the conviction of murdering Harvey and Jeanette Crew.
A Royal Commission of Inquiry into the case the following year found detectives had planted evidence and deliberately destroyed other information, a ruling which was always denied by police. Bruce Stainton, who worked on Allen's case, did a lot of trials as a defence barrister through the 80s. By 1985, 1 year before Allen was put on trial, the Court of Appeal had clearly set out prosecutors' disclosure responsibilities. Prosecutors were required to supply to the defence any information police held which would support the defence case.
One would have assumed that the goings-on with Arthur Allen Thomas's case would have cast a long shadow over the 1980s, that perhaps that would have been a natural reminder to police of their duties to fairness.
No, I didn't see that. If anything, I thought that they became a little tighter in what they gave you for fear of any repercussion.
Right.
So we had to struggle quite hard, even in the face of Arthur Allen Thomas' pardon. We had to deal with issues that were speculative, and the judges were helpful at times, but there was difficulty in being able to know what you didn't know.
This essential part of our justice system is almost entirely reliant on one thing: trust. Trust that all relevant evidence is disclosed and handed over to defendants like Alan. Trust that as a society of laws, we can be sure as citizens that if we're charged with a crime, we'll be given a fair trial. It is a trust considered paramount. Alan and his family believe that the police case against him betrayed that trust, and they are not alone.
August the 28th, 1987.
Radio Pacific News. Good evening. Convicted murderer Alan Russell Hall has failed in his appeal against a jury's verdict which found him guilty of murdering Arthur James Easton.
Alan Hall had been in prison for more than a year by the time his appeal was heard. He was now a convicted murderer, a murderer who some believed seemed quite out of place. Police Officer 1, who we've heard from before, once had to escort Alan on one of his many trips from the courthouse to prison. Seeing Alan in the back of the van, his behaviour and demeanour, Police Officer 1 always had doubts about whether police had got the right guy.
Frightened little boy, not aware of what was happening to him at all. His body language was displaying a very unsure lad of his age of where and what was happening to him. The silence, the staring, he wasn't all there. I don't think he understood the implication that he was in, what was going to happen to him.
A former corrections officer, Leanne Field, also felt that Alan was different to the other men held in his cell block where she worked.
Was there something that made him slightly different to the rest of the prisoners in there?
Socially, he was quite inept and he was very, very quiet. And of course, his sheer build, he's quite a slightly built man, not your run-of-the-mill prisoner in those days.
As someone who worked for corrections, how common was it for prisoners to come up to you and say, "I'm innocent"?
Oh, almost all of them. Mostly they were framed, and mostly they were definitely innocent of their crime. Right. Very, very common.
But for Leanne, among the hundreds of burglars, sex offenders and murderers she came into contact with in her time working in New Zealand jails, Alan stands alone.
Look, I've often said that the only person that I ever felt was not guilty of what they'd been found guilty of was Alan Hall. He never ever spoke about his case with me at all. Right. It was simply my knowledge of, the supposed offender, the crime they'd committed, etc. There was actually quite a strong discussion amongst prisoners, being told it by a number of different people that he wasn't the person responsible for the crime. And I was actually told the name of somebody else at the time by several sources. Right. Who may have in fact been responsible. Now whether that's right or not, I don't know, but there was a very strong feeling.
But even as Alan was stuck inside, on the outside, his family, led by Mum Shirley and lawyer Bruce Stainton, were continuing to try to prove his innocence.
We were able to get this evidence that had been suppressed, and this has started our fight.
The most crucial new piece of information was that the central detail from Witness A's sighting had been removed from his court statement. But as Bruce Stainton told me, this was far from the only thing that the prosecution failed to disclose.
Peter Williams asked for various specific documents and then did the catch-all at the end, anything else that would be of interest to the defence. The prosecutor then said in response that he did not consider that there was any other information that may be helpful to you. Well, that clearly is not right.
Included in the information not disclosed to the defence at trial was a statement made by ambulance driver Bernie Holt, who we heard from in episode 1.
And then the older one, he turned around and said, I should have killed the black bastard.
They never provided the ambulance driver's original statements, who quoted the boys as saying that the person was black, that he was a Māori. Once again, terribly important.
But police considered Bernie's evidence was not of material importance because the Easton boys said the following day they could not be sure of the intruder's ethnicity. Remarkably, the list of witnesses not disclosed to the defence before the trial does not end there. On the night of the murder, police had interviewed another witness, a local who was driving down Alma Crescent, the road behind Grove Road, when she saw a suspicious person walking quickly. She wishes to remain anonymous, so I'm going to refer to her as Witness B. Witness B was driving down Alma Crescent near Grove Road at around 8:10 on the night of the murder.
I was going to pick up my daughter in Alma Crescent. She'd been at a friend's grandmother's place for the day. I was just driving down the road and I saw a guy on the opposite side of the road to me, taking long strides, walking very briskly and just looking straight ahead.
And was there something about that stood out to you?
He looked to me just a little bit stressed, agitated, and sort of didn't look anywhere. It was just straight ahead.
Witness B later told police the man she saw was about 6 foot, slim, had shoulder-length dark hair, and his complexion was more on the dark side than fair. As she carried driving down the road, she came across a police car driven by the officer we have been referring to as Police Officer 1.
From memory, we came across 2 or 3 vehicles with people coming out of Alma, so we stopped and we spoke to those people. One of them would have been that lady by the name of...
They stopped me there and said, had I seen anybody up the road? And I said, yeah, just saw a gentleman or somebody up the road there.
But detectives said the timing of her sighting placed it too long after the murder of Arthur Easton to be relevant. For that reason, Witness B wasn't called to give evidence at the trial. To this day, the man she saw remains unidentified. Was he the same person seen by Witness A? Was he involved in the murder? Well, that may never be known. But Alan's lawyers believe they were entitled to have the opportunity to ask Witness B about what she knew under oath.
What was your reaction to knowing that your statement hadn't been provided to the defence before the trial or during trial?
I'm just very disappointed. I just don't think it's a fair thing, and that they hadn't gone through the right procedures.
Over the years, one by one, witnesses have either come forward or been found. And on a recent visit to the murder scene with Alan's brothers Jeff and Greg, I learned of another scenario not really explored at trial. The idea Arthur Easton's killer was not alone on the night when he arrived at Grove Road.
This is the site where Arthur Easton lost his life. I believe on the other side of it, there were other people here, and as that intruder left that house and ran down the alleyway that way, the other people from somewhere around here ran out and headed down Grove Road this way.
So is your working theory that there were maybe a group of offenders?
Well, it certainly sounds that way. I mean, if you got witnesses seeing people here, and another witness seeing a person up there, it's like they're diverging away from each other.
Yeah. Greg is talking about 2 motorists who around the time of the murder saw suspicious men running near the corner of Grove Road and Clevedon, a spot about 260 metres from the crime scene. One witness was Mike Bungard, who you will remember used to work at the Cadbury factory with Alan.
And I was getting on dark time, because normally when I finished milking and got home, it was normally pretty dark.
Greg, Jeff and I then walked to the location of Mike's sighting. The area looks a lot like it did. On the corner is a dairy, there's a liquor store, and further down Grove Road is a service station where Brendan Easton used to work as a teenager.
Yeah, no, Michael Bungard, he was out shoveling shit on a farm that day, late at night, and he came back at 8ish, down Clevedon Road. Someone come running out in front of him.
I can remember hitting the brakes there, and there was two guys. One went straight ahead, and the other one went across the road as well.
As Michael steps off again, he winds his window down and he yells out to the person that ran across the road.
Apparently I called him I think it was a prize prick.
Mike contacted police about what he saw 10 days after the murder. Detectives were so interested in his sighting, they asked him to go with them in a patrol car to where the sighting took place.
So we came up there and we did the simulation of what I did on that night. And it was roughly about where I hit the brakes or braked heavy for this person who's running across the road. And then from there we went back to the police station. Then I did a photo identification. They pulled out many albums of photos, and I identified the person in those photos as being the person who I believe I saw on that night. And that was...
Mike has long held suspicions about who he saw that night. It was a person known to him, but we've chosen not to name this person. I asked Mike if he felt this individual could have been involved in any way whatsoever in the murder of Arthur Easton.
That wouldn't surprise me. Would not surprise me at all. You know, he used to hang out with guys who'd been to jail who were dead and killed people.
Driving behind Mike that night was the second witness, Bill Cossey. Bill was coming back from work when he saw Mike in the car in front of him hit his brakes and a man run out in front of the car.
I'd say he'd be definitely a Māori chap, and he had dark hair and a moustache, and his hair was just above his neckline. The back of his hair was just above his neckline. I'm 100% sure he wasn't European. 100% sure.
Based on the location and timing of Bill and Mike's sighting, it is unlikely the man they saw was the same person seen by Witness A. And it is this possibility that brings into play the multiple offender theory, one floated in the media in the days after the murder.
Papakura detectives now have a second lead in their hunt for the killer of Mr Arthur Easton, who was stabbed to death in his Grove Road house 10 days ago. A man who police believe could have been the killer's lookout or accomplice was seen running from the area, dodging traffic and disappearing through a Clevedon Road property.
The sightings of Bill Cossey and Mike Bungard are given added significance by the fact that 2 weeks after the murder, police found a partial shoe print in the area of their sighting, which was similar to the print found at the Grove Road murder scene. Perhaps an intriguing link between the man Bill and Mike saw and the offender. Despite all of this, Bill Cossey was never called to give evidence at Alan Hall's trial.
I never heard from the police again.
Yeah. And nor was Mike Bungard.
And when was the next time after you took that statement with police? Were you ever asked to give evidence at court? Never. Have you spoken to police since? No.
I now know why these two men weren't called to give evidence. Picking through police documents, I came across the following police memo.
It is moot whether we should call Cossey to give evidence or not. His evidence will confuse the issue somewhat, as will the evidence of Bungard, the next witness. However, if we don't call them, we'll be obliged to provide copies of their statements to the defence, so they'll probably give the evidence anyway.
Alan's defence lawyer, Peter Williams, was actually provided with the statements from Bill Cossey and Mike Bungard, but to this day, I've not been able to establish why he did not call them to give evidence at Alan's trial. I can't ask Peter Williams or the lawyer who assisted him, because both are dead.
All persons, please be seated.
When relevant information is not presented to a jury at trial, the ultimate question for any appeal court is, would that information, had the jury heard it, made a material difference to the verdict? I asked Bruce Stainton what he thought would have happened had Witness A given his full evidence at Alan's trial.
Was it your view that had the jury been given his full statement, had he been there in person, do you think conceivably that it could have made the jury reach a different decision?
I do.
Evidence expert Scott Optican says it's also significant that the trial judge, Justice Pritchard, told the jury Witness A's evidence was important and repeated large parts of his statement back to them.
That's a signal to the jury that reliance and weight should be placed on it. Well, how can a jury do that accurately unless they know the full scope, and that was denied to them?
Yeah.
So my instinct is that it would have made a material difference in the case.
Yeah.
Or even if I couldn't prove that 100%,
Yeah.
if I was in appellate court, I would be disturbed enough by it that I would say, you know, the likelihood of it having an impact is strong enough that I would quash the conviction and try it again.
As we already know, Alan's lawyers did appeal, but the change to witness A's statement was still undiscovered when the Court of Appeal heard Alan's case.
The appeal was considered by Chief Justice Sir Robin Cook, Mr Justice Summers and Mr Justice Bison, and has been dismissed. The appeal lawyer was Peter Williams QC.
In the years following Alan's conviction, Shirley kept up her constant campaign to free her son.
We have the truth, and the truth is the only way to live. It's hard, but it gives you great strength, and that's what we're using to fight.
And after Alan lost his appeal in 1987, lawyer Bruce Stainton filed an application with the Governor-General for what is called the Royal Prerogative of Mercy. Acting on the advice of the Justice Minister, in New Zealand, the Governor-General has the power to grant a pardon, reduce a sentence, or refer a case back to the courts for reconsideration. Bruce Stainton based Alan's application on a number of grounds, but principally on the fact that Witness A's court statement had been altered.
We tried to say to the Governor-General that there is a number of things that have happened in this case where the jury haven't got the full story, that in fact there are many things within the full story that could definitely change a juror's view.
When Alan filed his application, the man who led the investigation against him, Detective Senior Sergeant Calvin McMinn, was asked to comment by Radio Pacific.
I do not believe that under the circumstances that it's proper for me to comment. I consider that the matters should be considered perhaps say sub judice, and the appropriate forum for the matters to be discussed or considered is in the courtroom and not in the media.
In 1988, at the Ministry of Justice in Wellington, the arguments raised by Bruce Stainton failed. He tried again in 1992 without success. On the question of Witness A's changed statement, the Ministry of Justice concluded that it would not have altered the outcome of the trial.
In view of the circumstances of the sighting, that is, it was brief, the walkway was dark and the man's face could not be seen clearly, and the fact that no satisfactory link established between the person seen and the intruder.
They managed to rationalise themselves out of making any decision to send it back to the court.
And so it was, in a letter dated the 27th of July 1993 from Governor-General Catherine Tizard, that Alan, Shirley and the rest of his family learned that Alan's pleas for clemency had once again failed to secure him a new trial. 25 years on, that letter remains the final ruling on Alan's guilt. But it failed to address a fundamental question in this case. Who exactly was responsible for Witness A's changed evidence?
It is in this case such a critical and obvious omission. Only the police can answer that.
In a quarter of a century, we've been no closer to an answer, until this year, when I received a letter. It was from a person I had least expected to hear from. Detective Senior Sergeant Calvin McMinn, the man who led the investigation into the death of Arthur Easton, the top cop who sent Alan to jail. A cop who was breaking his silence on the case for the first time in decades. In the next episode of Grove Road.
I took that as a message from a police officer inside the New Zealand Police saying it wasn't right.
But it would have been someone who had direct or indirect involvement in the case.
And you don't know who wrote it? I don't know.
Grove Road was produced by Maggie Wicks. Audio production by Asher Bastian. Music by Asher Bastian and Grant Brody. Graphics were done by Kushal Bhatia. Vinay Ranchhood and James Brown, with help from Finn Hogan, Silka Wheel, Anand Heda, Tom Turton, Carrie Johnson, Melissa Davies, radio documentary maker Jenny Anderson, Michael Mora and Sam Farrell. To learn more about the case, go to newshub.co.nz/podcasts. If you have any questions or tips about the murder of Arthur Easton, please email us at groveroad@mediaworks.co.nz.